Your Excellency, thank you for being with us on the Road to Net Zero with Khaleej Times.
My pleasure.
We'd like to speak about or start this conversation by speaking about the UAE-Netherlands relationship. I know this is a fairly new post for you. It's been 4 months. So can you tell us what do you feel the relationship with the UAE perhaps? Where is it heading?
Well, you know, diplomats, we always pretend to know everything immediately. That's part of the game. So even after 4 months, I'll try to give you a concise answer. I feel that we're really on a roll in these 4 months that I've been here. We've had my Prime Minister visiting. We've had our Minister of Justice and Security visiting. Your Minister of Foreign Trade, as we speak, is now in the Netherlands for the Joint Economic Committee that we have between our countries. So all of this in the space of 4 months, it's a roller coaster, and it's a good roller coaster. We have a lot of things that we want to deal with in common, and I'm looking forward on this 4 months basis to intensify the relationship and bring it to a higher level, and not just a transactional relationship, but a really partnership type of relationship.
Your Excellency, there is a major conference ahead of us, COP28. What do you think? Do you think that UAE hosting this COP28 makes it quite different?
Well, Abdallah, I think that when you get 80,000 people, because that's the number I'm hearing, to the expo grounds in Dubai for COP28, you better make some results. And I do think that the approach of the UAE has been very ambitious. I think what the UAE brings to the table organizing COP28 is, on the one hand, to really also talk in a very sound way about the role of carbohydrates in the whole climate discussion. And I think that that is an enormous win, that we are actually talking in a mature way about how this fits into the general problem solving that we need to do. What I also think is a unique contribution of the UAE is the role of the private sector that is very much highlighted in this particular meeting of the COP. I think the private sector has a contribution to make. We saw it also in ADIPEC, the oil and gas fair, where the UAE was stressing very much from the organization point of view that it's about decarbonizing the oil and gas industry. So there you talk about innovations, you talk about new technologies that will bring down the emissions in that industry. But you also talk about other private sector entities, other private sector achievements that can technologically bring the climate objectives closer for all of us. Also from the private sector, and that's a big discussion that I know you're going to address later, finance. We are looking at an enormous cost in addressing climate change for the rich countries, for poor countries. One thing is sure, it's going to cost all of us a lot of money to deal with the fallout of this whole climate change issue. And we need also finance from the private side to make the thing run as we want to.
Your Excellency, it's a collective responsibility, and I understand that. Do you think that one of the challenges, is it fair to say that one of the challenges is perhaps designating a specific amount or a fair amount for different countries to kind of, create this climate fund or for climate financing? So for instance, if it was a poor country, the numbers would go down. If it was a rich country, the numbers would go high. What do you think? And do you think that the private sector actually reached that perspective of accountability and understanding of how effective their role will be with climate financing, or, perhaps leading towards a sustainable future?
These kinds of issues, what we call the National Determined Contribution, NDC, for every country, that's the sort of framework in which you try to determine what is needed, how much money is involved to deal with the challenges of climate change in any particular national context. We have committed ourselves in Copenhagen to 100 billion additional a year for the poorest countries to help them address the problems of climate change. We're now achieving, as far as my people tell me, 83 billion a year. The Netherlands contributes 1.8 billion to that, so we're trying to do our fair share. But I think what we need indeed, as I said before, is the private sector to contribute. Now, that is not easy, and that is not automatically a given. If you want the private sector to contribute, you have to take some other factors into mind. You have to make sure that you have bankable projects that address climate change. You have to have a pipeline of projects that you develop. So you also have to create in the countries where you are trying to be active with private money, you have to create a facilitating environment. Private sector entities often pose different conditions to be present and to be implementing than government agencies. So you have to take all these things into account. And COP28, I think, is a good forum to address not only how much money we're going to try and raise from different sides, but also what are the preconditions, how can we facilitate that money to bring and bear fruit.
From your knowledge, Your Excellency, do you think that the private sector, and I will always go back to the private sector, because at the end of the day, the private sector is to a certain degree responsible for a lot of the CO2 emissions. And do you think that policies should be incorporated or legislation in terms of perhaps creating a tax for CO2 emissions, and this money gets transferred to developing nations, underdeveloping nations, to help them, with their climate challenges?
I think one of the things you find time and again with the private sector is that they say we are willing to make a contribution whenever, wherever, but we need a level playing field. We do not want to see one national context that provides us with these rules and regulations and another national context that puts it in a different way. Take, for example, green hydrogen.
Okay.
Green hydrogen is emission-free, and it would be a huge solution for industry to satisfy their energy demand. But at this point in time, green hydrogen is 3 times the price of normal energy. If we want to oblige by subsidies or by extra taxation the big users to use green hydrogen from now on, we have to do it in all countries. If we only do it in the European Union, then energy will be cheaper in China or in North America. If we only do it in China, then it will be cheaper for them to go to Europe. So we have to, at COP28, sit down as governments and look at what regulatory framework, what level playing field do we have to create for the private sector to also be able to engage in clean solutions and sometimes more expensive solutions.
So this can be considered one of the challenges that, we can speak about during this COP28 and discuss. Your Excellency, there is a lot of developing nations that faced a lot of, I would say, issues with climate change. Do you think we have been aiding them enough in terms of perhaps allocating specific resources for them to build their renewable energy sectors where they can get clean energy?
Well, let me start off by congratulating the UAE on the announcement of 4.5 billion for renewable energy in Africa. I think that is a great gesture, a great initiative, and it would certainly help and go a long way to see that Africa makes the energy transition that is so necessary. When it comes to the role that we can play assisting the poorest countries in their challenges with climate change, we, the Netherlands, try to look where do we have added value. You may know that we are a country with a lot of water. It comes from the sky, and then we have it in the sea, and we have it throughout our lands. And we have been learning over time a lot about water engineering, water management, the threat of water. How can we fight against rising water levels? So what we do is we try to bring that knowledge, that expertise to bear on the experiences of also the poorest countries. We are talking to, for example, Indonesia, not that that is the poorest country, of course, but we're talking to Egypt, we're talking to a lot of countries about how can we assist with our expertise to fight the challenges that are caused by climate change and adaptation, because that's what we're talking about when it comes to the water sector, is for us one of the really big financial engagements with poorest countries.
And even the knowledge and the transfer of the knowledge, Your Excellency, is very well applauded from everyone's end. We know that Indonesia is facing a lot of issues with the rising sea levels. To the point where they're actually transferring their capital, Jakarta, to Borneo because of this rise. Do you think that we need more to educate other countries and stakeholders in terms of with our know-hows? So if UAE has a specific know-how in terms of renewable, then they can educate X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth, even with Netherlands.
I think that is one of the great things that you can do during a COP. Showcase what knowledge, what expertise you have others react to that, have others ask questions, ask for assistance, maybe also sometimes get suggestions, you can do it even better in this way or even better in that way. This is a coming together of a lot of countries that have different capacities for addressing climate change. I think it's also a moment where we can learn from each other. What can we do to indeed bring the knowledge that we do have to all the corners of the world?
I agree. Your Excellency, in terms of climate finance, can you please walk us through how Netherlands has been, among the countries that is leading in terms of climate finance, or assuring that climate finance is to be implemented and the money goes to the right places, or how to raise this capital?
We are a very active multilateral player. We are contributing to multilateral banks like the World Bank, but also the regional banks in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. And through these channels, we try to stress also to the management of these banks, you need to really start monitoring how much you do on climate. How much of your total loan portfolio can be seen as benefiting climate objectives. We reached in our negotiations with the World Bank for IDA the goal of 35% of all portfolio spending of the World Bank should be climate sensitive and should be fitting into climate objectives. We did that. So that means that of the 93 billion that the World Bank has through their IDA window available for the coming 3 years, for this period of 3 years, that 35% of that 93 billion is climate funding. So that's how we try to sort of up the ante and make sure that we get more bang for our buck through the multilateral channels. As I said before, we also contribute from our side 1.8 billion, but we also want to challenge everybody, and we are actively also doing that with our innovative financing department in The Hague. How can we make it possible and attractive for the private sector to also come on board and contribute to climate financing? There's a special technique to that. It doesn't happen as easily as just pulling money from a government coffer, but there are definitely ways that you can interest pension funds, institutional investors, to put at least part of their money towards climate objectives. And that's why we also, with our innovative funding people, trying to make a difference.
In terms of the 2030 targets of Netherlands, is Netherlands still on track?
We are looking, at the moment, we have a pact that we've made nationally, a climate pact. And that pact states that we want to be, and it's not as good as the UAE objective, but we want to be 95% emission-free by 2050. And we have made a roadmap that takes us there with benchmarks for 2030, et cetera, et cetera. But the objective is in 2050, 95% emission-free economy. We also want to be a circular economy by that time, which means that we are going to try and halve and eventually even further reduce our use of raw materials, new raw materials. So we are on different aspects, we are trying to make great headway. We also have an intensive agriculture in the Netherlands.
Yes.
That is something that will not be sustainable in the same form as we have it now. So also there we're working on transiting the sector to a more sustainable level. We will try to be the brains of agriculture for the whole world, as we have been, I think, for decades. But our actual production in agriculture probably will have to go down when we are looking at the climate objectives. Another thing is, in the Netherlands, I mentioned it before, we have a lot of water. And we also have to adapt our own country to rising water levels. We have to widen the area where water can flow. We have to heighten our dikes. And we have to make sure that we also build, for example, windmill parks in the sea, and that we start using earth heat to heat houses that we build. So we are looking at all sorts of also very technical advances to make sure that our economy will be sustainable, will be emission-free by 2050, as much as we can make it.
Your Excellency, last but not least, do you think, we've heard roughly that we need to hit the $1 trillion marker very soon in terms of, funneling money for climate change or the climate crisis. Do you think that is something that is doable, or, it's something to be just foreseen?
Well, Abdallah, I don't have a crystal ball. I would love to have one. The mark that you mentioned, 1 trillion, is huge. And I'm aware of the fact that other benchmarks have not been reached in the past when we were meeting in previous COPs. I, of course, sincerely hope that this COP will provide us with more funding than we've seen before. But I must also be realistic in the fact that 1 trillion during COP28.
Not COP28. 2030, by 2030.
By 2030.
Yes.
I think it's doable.
Okay.
But I also think that we can only make it doable if we reinvigorate our approach. We really have to go out there and make it clear, why is it important? Why is not doing that going to result in mayhem that we will carry with a much higher cost forward?
Collective suffering.
If you want to call it suffering, I would like to call it a collective investment.
Okay. So I meant suffering in terms of, we spoke to a couple of people in Africa. The global south has been affected even by droughts. So, and their economies are heavily, let's say, they're heavily not responsible, but they're agricultural economies, and droughts is not very healthy for it. Your Excellency, we're about to end. What is your aspiration, or Netherlands' aspirations for this COP, for COP28?
We want to make sure that we end with a loss and damage fund, with institutional arrangements set up, with eligibility criteria agreed, and with the funding arrangements in place. We hope that that will be possible. We have the stocktake, of course, the global stocktake. I hope there will be a sound basis after this COP to see how are we going to indeed, on the basis of what we know now, achieve our objectives. What do we need to do? Where do we need to do more? Where are we on track? And what measures are coupled with that? So, and I hope that we make great advances in mobilizing new sources of funding, be they private, be they governmental, be they multilateral, that will enable all countries to get ready for this climate change and to try and collectively reduce the risks that emanate from that.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
You're welcome. Thank you, Abdallah.